Michael, I feel like we could give it another 2 minutes and then start at 6:05. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds fine for me.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to wish everyone a good evening and thank you all for joining us tonight for the ABCs of Local Investing. My name is Kristen Mitchell and I'm the Executive Director of the Market Center Merchants Association and the Market Center Community Development Corporation here in Baltimore. Together, the two organizations work to revitalize Market Center. For those of you who may not know, Market Center is a community located on the west side of downtown Baltimore, just north of Camden Yards and east of the University of Maryland at Baltimore. We are the happy home of a number of landmarks, such as Lexington Market, the Central Library, and the Hippodrome Theater. What many people may not realize is that we have hundreds of small businesses in Market Center. In fact, of the 283 street level businesses that are currently located in Market Center, more than 95% of them are locally owned and more than 70% are minority owned. And we are committed as a community to continuing to support these small businesses and nurture the growth and diversity of our small business community. You can find out more about us, the businesses, and the development activity at marketcenterbaltimore.org. Before I proceed with introductions, I want to thank the T. Rowe Price and the Able Foundations for making tonight's class and two additional classes that we will be holding in the future possible. First, I want to introduce Stephanie Geller, who will be mostly behind the scenes tonight. She's here, she's saying hello right now, but she's going to be working behind the scenes tonight to gather and sort through and organize your questions for the Q&A segment of tonight. Stephanie is the Director of Community Wealth Builders, which fosters a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable neighborhood economy by promoting community wealth building models and opportunities in Baltimore City. Community Wealth Builders runs the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange, which is the first of its kind community-based platform that is designed to facilitate local investing on federally licensed crowdfunding investment sites. The exchange prepares Maryland businesses to seek capital via investment crowdfunding, and it helps businesses mobilize their customers, fans, and other interested Marylanders to invest. Our instructor this evening is Michael Schuman, who is an economist, attorney, author, and entrepreneur. In his spare time, he's the director, and I'm joking, he is the director of local economy programs for Neighborhood Associates Corporation and an adjunct professor at Bard Business School in New York. He has authored, co-authored, or edited 10 books. His most recent book is Put Your Money Where Your Life Is, which is really what tonight is all about, helping us put our money where our lives are. So with that, let's get started. Michael, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen. And everyone else who is here, thank you so much for coming. Please mute yourselves just to make sure we have the cleanest sound possible. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to give you about 45 minutes worth of material, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And the way that I like to do classes is that if there's any clarification questions, ask them immediately. And hopefully Stephanie can interrupt me and say, you know, what is this abbreviation? What do these initials mean? Something like that. But if it's a discussion question or a bigger issue, save it, and we're going to have lots of time to do that kind of discussion at the end. Our hope for tonight is not just to give you information, but hopefully also to give you inspiration. If you are in and around Baltimore, hopefully inspiration to become either investors or if you are a business to think about opening yourself up for local investment. And if you're not in Baltimore, and I know some of you are beaming in from around the country, hopefully this will be an inspiration for the kind of material, the kind of organizing to start doing in your own community. So I am going to share my screen here. And Kristen, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay. So Market Center is a fabulous part of Baltimore. And I know many of you on the call tonight live there, work there, are part of this. We actually asked a number of you to fill out a survey, and only a handful of you did, but I would encourage all of you on this call to fill out the survey later on tonight, because it gives us a lot of good information about your relationship to the community and how we can and will follow up with you. The context for this evening, of course, is the challenges that have been presented by a year of COVID-19. And besides the fairly dramatic impacts on public health all across the country, but especially impacting communities of color, there is the economic damage, and literally hundreds of thousands of small businesses are dead or dying, and the neighborhoods that depend on them are sort of caught on the brink. And bringing those businesses back to life is one of the critical challenges in front of us for a healthy recovery from this pandemic. The good news is that we can bring our local businesses back. Many local businesses have struggled through this pandemic. They are looking for capital, they are looking for support, and I think they will be open to the kinds of local investment we might present them with. But I think a reasonable starting place for explaining why local investment matters is to understand why local business matters. Now, as I'll talk about a little bit later on, local investment can be in many different things. It can be in you personally, in your family, it can be in real estate, it can be in bonds. But I'm going to focus primarily tonight on local businesses, because this is a key part of our recovery from COVID. This is a study that was done in 2017, comparing how money moved through the Central Co-op, a locally owned grocery store in Seattle, how money moved through that compared to a similarly sized chain grocer in Seattle. And what it shows is that for every dollar that goes into the co-op, about 50 cents gets respent in the community. Whereas with the chain grocer, it's more like 25 cents on the dollar. There's lots of reasons for this, but we know from lots of studies that local businesses spend more of their money locally, and they have an important impact on the economy. And one of the findings in this particular study was that if you replace Central Co-op with a chain grocer, Seattle would actually lose about 100 net jobs because of the impacts, the multiplier impacts of local spending. There have been about 36 of these kinds of studies done in the last 20 years, comparing the impact between similar businesses or similar industries, one locally owned, one not. And they all show that dollar for dollar, a dollar spent on a locally owned business or industry generates 2 to 4 times the jobs and economic development impact compared to a dollar spent in a non-local business or industry. There's not a single study that has shown otherwise, but you don't have to take my word for it. This is from the Harvard Business Review in the summer of 2010. It's an analysis of communities across the United States and found that in those communities with the highest per capita, those communities with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita job growth rate. But not just that, this study from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta in 2013 looked at counties across the United States and found that in those counties with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita income growth rate. In other words, if your goal is social equality and addressing poverty, promoting, supporting, investing in locally owned businesses is the key ticket for doing so. There's lots of other things that local business bring to a community. Smart growth is all about creating walkability, and local businesses, which tend to be small, certainly achieve that more than big box stores. We know that local businesses bring the unique DNA of the community, which is what ultimately attracts tourists. Local businesses are what fosters entrepreneurship in the community. It's the dynamism of economic development. We now have a public health literature that shows that in local food communities, there are lower rates of type 2 diabetes and obesity because local food is healthier, has less packaging, less processing. We also have a political science literature that tells us that local business communities have higher rates of voting and volunteership. Local business communities are also better for the environment. We know that the wealth that comes out of a density of locally owned businesses can support environmental restoration and reinvention. We know that local shipment of goods and services brings down the carbon footprint of commerce. There's also an interesting study that was done by the Environmental Protection Agency, which compared smokestack industries of 2 kinds, one locally owned, one not, and found that locally owned smokestack industries had a fraction of the pollution output of absentee owned. And really the only explanation that is shame. That is, the operators of the long distance, the absentee owned companies never would encounter people at church, school, the shopping center who might encourage them to clean up their act. But there's something else about a strong local economy as well. And that is everything that, say, Baltimore accomplishes in the name of sustainability, whether it is a stronger local food system or energy self-sufficiency or biochar appearing at Camp Small or good stormwater management. When these activities are shared with communities around the world, and we likewise absorb the wisdom of other communities around the world, this is the way we make real progress around sustainability. When you think about local economic development, in my view, this really involves attention to 6 P's: planning, people, partners, purchasing, and policymaking. And broadly speaking, planning is about identifying leaks in your economy, all the ways that people are spending money on outside goods and services, and figuring out ways of expanding local businesses to plug those leaks. People means nurturing a new generation of entrepreneurs to lead those leak plugging businesses. Partners means creating networks of local business like Kristen runs at Market Center that are more competitive as a team than they would be on their own. Purse means harnessing savings that we have and putting those into local businesses as investment. Purchasing means spearheading buy local or think local first campaigns. And policymaking can mean all kinds of things, but in my mind, the first goal of policymaking is to do no harm with local businesses. Now, I've been on the bully pulpit talking about this subject for almost 30 years. And most groups that I talk with, most small business groups, when they reflect on what is the biggest challenge that they face, it's usually purse. That challenge is all the more true now post-COVID, because businesses desperately need money in order to come back to life, to thrive, and to expand. Now, to understand what are the possibilities of local investment, I think it's useful to think about the kind of larger universe of capital in the United States. So this graph here sort of represents all household and nonprofit financial assets in 2018. And the numbers now wouldn't be very different. And what you can see is that, in some ways, we're a fabulously wealthy country, that we have more than $100 trillion in mostly household assets. And some of those assets, this black stripe, is households, and not just houses, cars, and other equipment that's inside of them. The bottom stripe, the light blue stripe, is banks. And then there's this giant blue middle stripe that's $56 trillion, and that is securities. And securities are basically pieces of paper that businesses issue that people buy into, and those pieces of paper carry legal obligations. There may be debt or equity or royalty kinds of agreements. But I think it's interesting from this particular graph to note that even if we had 100% local banking, the securities universe would still mean that most of our finances were not local. Because when you look at that securities universe of $56 trillion, they're in stocks, bonds, life insurance, pension funds, and mutual funds. And 99% of those savings are in globally traded companies, globally traded bonds and stocks that have no local content with them whatsoever. And this leads me to this slide, which is my sense of the current investment strategy. If we were in person in one room, I would ask you all by show of hands, how many of you have at least 1% of your savings in locally owned business? And there would be very few hands that would go up. Now, this is really odd. This is odd because it turns out that 60 to 80% of the US economy is in locally owned business, depending on how you define local. These businesses are highly competitive, highly profitable, and yet we all are systematically over-investing in Fortune 500 companies and under-investing in local business. Now, the reason for this is not some evil cause, although you could make that case, but it's really because in securities laws, which were passed in the 1930s, we created two tiers of investors. So if you're like Gordon Gekko, in the top couple of percentage points in America in wealth or income, you are allowed to invest in anyone, anytime, no questions asked. If you're the rest of us, you are an unaccredited investor, and a business cannot take a penny of your money until it has registered securities with federal and state authorities. And historically, that kind of registration, even for a small stock issue, would cost you easily $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. And this was just way unaffordable for most small businesses, so they just would go to accredited investors. If we could fix this system, if we could move 60% of that $56 trillion into the 60% of the economy of locally owned business, it works out to $100,000 per person. I mean, that is a huge potential movement of capital that could drive unprecedented economic development in our communities. But what's needed is a fundamentally new approach to investment where we as the grassroots investors begin to move our money from Wall Street back to Main Street. Now, we don't have to be perfect about this. Even if we move, say, a small percentage of our money, it can make a big difference. This was a study that I did in Metro Cleveland in 2010, looking at the impact of a 25% shift toward local food in Metro Cleveland. And what we found is that this kind of shift would create 27,000 new jobs, paying almost $1 billion of new wages, and generate $126 million of state and local tax revenue. Now, you would have to expand local food businesses in order to accomplish that. And we calculated that new investment would need to be somewhere around $750 million. But as this graph shows, $750 million, which is the little red line on the left, is about 1% of what Clevelanders have in their bank accounts, and 1/4% of what they have in their long-term savings. In other words, just the tiniest movement of capital, 1 or 2 percentage points of your pension savings into local business, can have this extraordinary impact on community development. The good news is that starting in 2012, a lot of us were able to move through Congress and then at various state house levels reforms in these securities laws. And this is the first and only time I was in the Rose Garden for the signing of the so-called Jobs Act, which legalized investment crowdfunding in 2012. Now, even though it was signed into law in 2012, it didn't really uh, become actionable. It needed all these regulations put into place until 2016. But crowdfunding has now been operating for a little more than 4 years. And the record of crowdfunding is extraordinary. So first, just a little bit about how the whole system of investment crowdfunding works. And it's worth pointing out that investment crowdfunding has nothing to do with donation crowdfunding. There are sites like Kickstarter and GoFundMe that you've been involved in where businesses or people are raising donations. Those are not securities. Those are not part of tonight's discussion. What we're talking about is businesses issuing securities, which could mean debt, it could mean equity, it could mean royalty agreements. Under the Jobs Act, any company can raise up to $1.07 million per year. Any individual can invest as much as $2,200 per year. But if you have more income than, say, $100,000, that ceiling goes a little bit higher. And even with those limitations, there has been a spectacular growth of crowdfunding. And by the way, this image that I have on the slide is Mainvest. It's one of our partners for the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. But there are now about 70 portals out there that are facilitating investment crowdfunding. Here are some numbers, just to throw you some numbers.
Michael, I'm going to interrupt with just one question in
Yes.
the chat that I think is useful to talk about. Not everyone understands the word debt and equity in this context. So if you can just take a step back and talk about what, the instruments. Thanks.
Great. Yes. So debt, an example of debt is where a company borrows money from a bunch of investors. So you would basically give a company a loan for 5 years for maybe $500, and they pay you back at a certain interest rate. That's one kind of security. Another kind of security is where the company will give you stock. And the stock is a tiny little piece of equity in the company. And the way that you get paid is the stock either pays dividends or the stock has some appreciation. A final way that you might conceive of a security is as a royalty kind of an agreement. So a royalty agreement maybe will pay you some percentage of the company's profits or gross revenues each year. And that's been very popular with, say, food businesses that have irregular sales patterns, and then they can pay out people when they're doing well and not necessarily pay out when they're not doing well. But the record on crowdfunding is really quite extraordinary, that over 4+ years, about 700,000 Americans have invested more than $500 million in several thousand companies. The average company has been able to raise close to $300,000. The average investor has put into a company $800. Among the most successful entrepreneurs relative to their success outside of crowdfunding have been women and people of color. And I think what that underscores is that the existing capital system is pretty broken and has lots of biases built into it. And crowdfunding has, in a way, democratized the marketplace and made it easier for women and people of color to raise money in a fair and equitable way. So there are lots of kinds of local investment, as I mentioned early on. Investment in yourself is a form of local investment. For example, putting money into getting yourself out of credit card debt is a form of local investment. Investing in your own business is a form of local investment. Investing in your kids to get them, say, out of student loan debt, or investing in your friends is a form of local investment. Local investment could be putting money in your favorite business, nonprofit, or co-op. It could be putting money into real estate. It could be putting money into one of the small number, but it's growing, of community investment funds. Or it could be putting money in a local bank or a credit union. The goal of local investing is to kind of find the sweet spot where you have a reasonable rate of return for yourself, the private return, a good rate of return for your community, and you are able to have manageable risk. So I want to talk briefly about the risks and returns of local investing. First, let's talk about the returns. And I think all of us, when we kind of come into this universe of local investing, we have certain beliefs that are reinforced to us by the media messages we get. So if, for example, you listen to a local AM radio superstar, Rick Edelman, who wrote a book called The Truth About Money once. If you listen to his radio show, he will often say that leave your money long-term in the stock market and you're going to get 10%, 12%, 14%. And you hear lots of these numbers bandied about. None of these numbers are real or reliably conveyed. And I think a far better person to go to is Robert Shiller. Robert Shiller is a professor of economics at Yale. He is the author of the Case-Shiller Index on Housing Prices. And he, on his website, has Standard & Poor's prices every month, starting from around 1870, as well as dividends, as well as inflation rates. And if you put those numbers together, what you find is that today, the average rate of return in any given year on the stock market was about 8%, 8% in real economic terms. But that is arguably, the peak of what you can do. Because most of us cannot time our entry or exit into the market perfectly. And in a way, the 8% represents a perfect timing in and out of the market. Most of us also have transaction costs in the investments that we do. For example, those of us with mutual funds, you're paying something like around 1% on many of these funds each year for the management fees associated with it. There are taxes that often are placed on your gains of these, and those bring down your rate of return. And here's something else to think about. The stock market right now, and that's where this 8% number comes from, the stock market right now is at its historic high. If we were to look at, say, how has the market done since the early 2000s to now? It's more like around 5%. So I actually would argue that the number that we need local investment to match or beat is probably closer to 5% than 8%. And it turns out that there are a bunch of local investments that are likely to generate higher rates of return. So for example, if you invest in yourself or your kids or friends and get them out of credit card debt, the typical interest and penalties that people are paying on credit cards are north of 20% per year. So every dollar you put in to avoid a 20% payment is going to exceed the 5% you would get in Wall Street. And I'm not going to go into these in depth now, but but I have explanations of all these things in my most recent book, Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. But I would argue that investing in students to get them out of debt, investing in a house that is moving yourself from being a mortgage from a renter to a mortgage holder, or paying down your mortgage faster, or investing in energy efficiency or a greenhouse, or investing in real estate, or actually even investing in a lot of co-op expansions. These tend to pay above 5%, so many of them significantly above 5%. What are below Wall Street, but just a little bit below Wall Street, are local businesses. Most local businesses are probably going to be paying you 3 or 4%. Same thing with nonprofits out there and community funds. Community bonds, municipal bonds, some of them could be equal to Wall Street, but most of them are a little bit lower, but they have other advantages. And then if you put your money in your local bank or credit union on deposit, you're going to get just a tiny, tiny percent, even though the money will not be at any risk there. I thought it's worth pointing out that in theory, local businesses should over time generate a higher rate of return, higher profitability than non-local businesses. So the best data on this point that I've been able to find are from Canada. And what this study from 2009 shows is that when you look at profitability of Canadian companies by size, the most profitable companies have 10 to 20 employees. The least profitable companies are those that are the largest, with over 500 employees. That is, those that are traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And I think what this reminds us of is that, yes, local businesses carry lower rates of return right now because the market for local securities is pretty new and immature. But as that market matures, I believe that this profitability picture will ultimately prevail, and people will be able to get equal or better returns from local businesses. What about risk? If you were to ask an investment advisor, should you put some of your money into some local businesses in Market Center, they would discourage you. And they would discourage you for a bunch of different reasons. They would say, look, most local businesses fail, so that would be a very bad idea. And you're going to have fewer businesses to choose from than if you look at businesses globally. So your chance of choosing wrong is greater. If you are a local business looking for local capital and you say, I'm only going to go for local investors, well, you're going to have fewer investors to choose from. And then there's the issue of the business cycle. Every community goes through ups and downs. And if all of your eggs are in a local basket and your community goes in a downward business cycle, maybe you were hit by a hurricane, all of those businesses are going to lose some value, and you're going to be in trouble. Now, unfortunately, investment advisors, when they have this kind of conversation with people, have done two things that are irritating. One is they made a mistake because they said that all local businesses have a high failure rate, and that isn't true. Local business startups have a high failure rate. All business startups have a high failure rate. But in fact, many local businesses, particularly those, that have been around for a few years and have established their chops with experienced management and have shown good profitability when they expand to, say, one store to two, one restaurant to two, they're very good buys. The other thing that the investment advisors have done is they have not given you all the reasons that local investment can decrease your risk. So, for example, we know that people who actually know the businesses that they are investing in have better information than those people who are investing blindly on the stock market. Uh, you get a chance to test the product, the good or the service. You get a chance to talk with the employees, maybe kibitz with the manager. Your chance of being taken in by some kind of Enron-like fraud is significantly smaller. You also get, in addition to your private return, you get a social return because that stronger business is going to pay taxes, which in turn is going to support your city, your teachers, your police and fire people, and so forth. Another thing that local businesses can enjoy with local investment is that their consumers, their investors become their best advocates. That is, if I'm a member of a local grocery co-op, I'm going to be sure I do my shopping there because I get a patronage payment that rewards me for all my shopping there. But I'm also going to be an evangelist who encourages other people to maybe become members of the co-op as well. That's a kind of a dynamic that you cannot really get in most global businesses. So the next thing I want to do is talk about how you find local investments. And here, there's a lot of things to say, but I'll just give you a short list. So the first thing I would say is the people who are on this call are fellow travelers. And one of the things that Kristen, Stephanie, and I want to do is put you all together with one another, because you have expressed this sort of basic interest. And these pictures here are actually people who have received investment from a group called Slow Money in North Carolina. Slow Money is a local investment consortia of individuals and businesses across the United States focused on local food businesses. And so, to the extent that you know anyone in the Slow Money movement or organization, you may find some fellow travelers. A second thing you might do is form a group. So the guy on the right is named James Fraser. He grew up in a small town in Washington state called Port Townsend. Port Townsend has about 10,000 people. He went to New York, became a hedge fund manager, got fairly wealthy, felt a little guilty about it, came back to Port Townsend and said, okay, I want to give back. So he set up in 2007 an organization called Lion. Lion stands for the Local Investment Opportunity Network. And basically what Lion was a party. It was a monthly party where he invited local businesses looking for investment and people like yourself who were thinking about whether to be local investors. He invited them to one location, and he plied them with free food and alcohol, and relationships came out of that. And what people forget is that at the end of the day, investment is largely about relationships. And the relationships that came out of Lion and continue to come out of Lion are responsible in a 10,000 person town for almost $1 million of local investment per year since 2007. This was such a hit that the Washington State Commerce Department is now promoting the creation of Lions across rural Washington. They have a slightly different name. They're called LINs, Local Investment Networks. But this is exactly what we need across Baltimore. We need to create groups of you who are interested in this topic and in a way helping each other succeed. I'll say more about that later. Another place where you can find local investments is the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. And I'll give you the website location for that in a little bit. But what Stephanie and I have been trying to do is list all the companies that we know of in Baltimore that are seeking capital on the federally licensed investment portals to make it easy for you to go to one place and find these companies. Another place where you might find companies, and this is relevant for those of you who are not from Baltimore on this call, is there's a wonderful site called Investibule. And Investibule, you can plug in your interest area, you can plug in your state, and soon you may be able to plug in your county or your zip code, and thump, up comes a list of all of the live issues connected to your community. The next challenge is, how do you evaluate local investments? Because you may decide, all right, I'm willing to put $500 into local investments, and you find a bunch of companies that you might be interested in, but which one do you choose? How do you think about it? So obviously the first thing you need to do is study the companies, and ask sometimes hard questions and figure out what you believe their risks and returns are. How exactly you do that is a deeper discussion, but it's basically, reviewing some of their documents. Another thing that you will want to pay attention to is the nature of the security that they're issuing to you. So is it a loan, or is it a piece of stock or equity? If it's a loan, what's the interest rate? How rapidly are they going to pay you back that loan? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? That's going to matter. If it's stock, often there's fine print about how you might be able to resell it, or maybe you won't be able to resell it. And so, none of us want to be 20 years hence holding meaningless pieces of paper. So this is something you'll want to pay attention to. And then another thing you'll want to pay attention to is your own risk profile. And really, you kind of want to create a grid in your mind where, you evaluate the investments you're looking at and you ask, well, are they high risk or are they low risk? And also, are they high liquidity and low liquidity? And basically, if it's, high risk and low liquidity, that's going to put you in a fairly risky situation. But you might, that may be something that you want to do. And I think the younger we are, sometimes the more risk we're willing to take with our investments. The older we are, often the more we want liquidity, because we want to cash out and retire at some point. So if I was to start putting some securities in these categories, just to kind of give some examples, like low risk, low liquidity, Investment in energy efficiency. These are often, no-brainers, contracts with utilities. That money is definitely going to pay you back and pay you back in a certain number of years. Or if you have long-term bank CDs, that's pretty reliable, low risk, low return as well. Or low risk, high liquidity. So municipal bonds, there are, maybe Baltimore has issued some municipal bonds you can get your hands on. Those have high liquidity. There are bond markets out there that you could resell them on. Your deposits on a credit union, you can always withdraw them. Or paying down your credit card debt. That's your decision about how fast or slow you want to do that. High risk, low liquidity. So if you buy stock in a local startup, that is often going to be a high risk kind of investment. Or I should say, and this will be something that you will have trouble selling down the road. It has low liquidity. Or if you give a long-term loan to a neighbor, it's going to be kind of risky unless you really know that neighbor well. And you're kind of stuck with that neighbor. You're not going to be able to resell that loan somewhere. But if I go further down the list, high risk but higher liquidity, could do a short-term loan to a local startup. So it being short-term, that gives you more liquidity. Or it could be a short-term loan to a neighbor. That could give you more liquidity. Anyway, this is just to introduce you sort of to the concepts. And this is something you probably want to do not just alone, but with a group of people where you're all sort of comparing potential investments and you're evaluating them and you're thinking through these issues around them. Now, another challenge that a local investor has is that many of us have our savings exclusively in IRAs, investment retirement accounts, or 401ks, our workplace savings. And these options, these places where we save our money, give you no ability to invest locally. There is no possibility of investing a 401k or a IRA that's vanilla flavored into local business. But do not despair, because there are tools that you can use to move your money into either self-directed IRAs or a solo 401k. So with a self-directed IRA, you can move your existing IRA into an IRA that you control. You basically have to hire a custodian with a trust company, but you make all the decisions of where that money goes, and you can decide to put that money into local businesses. You also, by the way, can transform your IRA into its own limited liability company, which in turn can do a lot of different kinds of local investment. But that's an advanced topic. The cost of setting up a self-directed IRA, if you shop around, can be as low as $250 per year. The solo 401k is another option available for local investors. And in this case, you create your own account in your own bank. So you don't need to hire a custodian. You administer the account yourself, but you have to basically purchase a pre-approved agreement, pre-approved by the IRS, in order to run your own account. And this is going to cost you, again, if you shop around carefully, $300. Now, a solo 401k is probably advantageous, and I'll explain why in a moment. But to understand, to create a solo 401k, you need $1 of Schedule C income. And if you have $1 Schedule C income, say from your second job, you can set up a solo 401k. The other requirement is that you can't have any full-time employees. So the whole purpose behind a solo 401k was to say self-employed people need to have an ability to create a retirement savings plan equivalent to workers who work for big companies. So it turns out that the solo 401k is tremendously more advantageous than a self-directed IRA. First of all, it's cheaper. A one-time payment of $300 is a lot better than an annual payment of a couple of $100s. Second, you don't have to work through an obnoxious custodian. You just do it yourself. Third, you can put a lot more money into your solo 401k and hide it from the tax man than you can with a self-directed IRA. In an IRA, you can put away somewhere around, $6,000 or $7,000 per year, depending upon how old you are. With a solo 401k, there are circumstances in which you can put away up to about $130,000 a year. So if you have the kind of job where you have this bonanza that comes to you in 1 year, you're exactly the kind of person who should be setting up a solo 401k. And there's one other thing about a solo 401k that's not true of a self-directed IRA, which is you can give yourself a loan of up to $50,000 from your account, or half of your account, whichever is less. And you can basically pay yourself back, your account back, at a low interest rate. So say you've racked up a lot of credit card debt, and you're wondering, well, do I pay down the credit cards with money in my regular accounts? No, what you might do is take out a big loan from your solo 401k and pay off those credit cards which are charging you 20%, and then pay yourself back at a couple of percent, 3 or 4%. And you pay off your credit cards and you're home free. I mean, people have no idea of the potential advantages of the solo 401k. Now, here's one other wrinkle about all of this. If you have a workplace pension fund, a 401k, right now, under its rules, chances are very good you cannot move that money anywhere else until you retire, resign, are fired, or move to another job. That's okay, because I think the secret to local investment success is to set up a solo 401k now with like $1 that you declare on your Schedule C, because you have a little mail order business that you're going to declare on the goods you sell on eBay. And then when you're able to separate yourself from your employer, then you can move all of the rest of that money into your solo 401k, and then you're off to the races and you're able to be a full-on local investor. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about this dimension of local investing, the self-directed IRA and the solo 401k, I encourage you to join the Next Egg. And one of my colleagues, Valeria Epstein, is on this call. At least she was earlier, and you could send her a message or just check out the nextegg.org. I know there's a couple of people on this call who are businesses, and I wanted to just say a few words about how you might think about local investment from your standpoint. One question that you should ask yourself about local investment is, there are downsides to doing it that you should be aware of. How much are you willing to tolerate more debt? Or if you issue equity, are you willing to lose some control in your company? And are you prepared to assume, some degree of an administrative headache in managing and feeding your various investors? Now, there's counter arguments to each of those things, but I think it's something to think about. A second question is, are you ready for investment? I think if you're a company that's just an idea, you probably shouldn't be in the business of raising capital quite yet. You probably want to have actual sales first to show that your business is viable. You probably want to have some kind of solid growth plan, if not a solid business plan. You want to have a pretty solid board and maybe a group of advisors and people that the community knows. And then there's a question about whether or not you're ready for crowdfunding. And, crowdfunding in and of itself requires you're asking, do you have a fan base? Do you have, 1,000 or more customers or other people who love your business? If you do, then you might be a good candidate for crowdfunding because you can transform those customers or fans into investors. Are your books in order? One of the things that you will have to do on a crowdfunding site is, jump through a couple of hoops to prove that your accounts are in order. Now, if it's a small amount of money, you won't need an actual legal review. Your board simply has to say the numbers are real. But if it's a large amount of money, you may have to spend a little money on an accountant to do a thorough review. Let's see. So where I want to wind this up, and then we'll open it up to questions, is just a couple of suggested next steps for all of you. First of all, this is a complicated field. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, and it takes some time to learn all this stuff and to become versatile and good at it. And one of the ways that I think I can help you learn is that I am running more in-depth local investment 101 courses. I have 15 videotapes, each between 20 and 40 minutes. And if you're interested in signing up for these courses, you can come to my website, michaelhschuman.com. I'm doing two sets of classes now that run over 4 weeks, one for groups in New Hampshire and Vermont, one for groups in Washington State. But you folks in Baltimore are welcome to join these classes or just view the videos on your own if you want. The second thing you might do is form a group. And I've said this at various points, but forming a group is really helpful in a number of ways. First of all, there's a lot of work to do in doing local investment well, and it's good to split up the tasks. It's also good to check with one another that you're thinking about things as sound. Now, when I say a group, I don't mean you necessarily as a group have to form a formal investment group where you make your investment decisions together. You could do that, but just simply a group that tries to find and evaluate and think about local investment together. Another thing that I encourage you to do is use the exchange, because the simplest way that you can get involved tonight in local investment is to look at the growing list of companies that is listed at the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. And this is the web link where you can go there. And then you click on any company that's interest. You'll get to a federally licensed portal, might be Mainvest, might be Honeycomb Credit, might be WeFunder. Those are our partners. And you will be able to put some money in if you want to invest tonight. Another thing that we ask you to think about is mobilizing others. So you folks, you were the brave first comers who came to our clarion call that we want to do some significant local investment organizing and market center. We're going to do a few more events like this. The next one is going to be on April the 20th. And we encourage you to send friends and businesses you love and others to come to that event as well. So I'm going to stop here and open up to questions and comments.
So Michael, we have a lot of questions, and we have Lashana from Sporty Dog joining like in a half an hour. So I'll try to, I've tried to group them and I'll read you some together, but just know there are a lot that I'm going to be feeding to you. And everyone feel free to keep them coming. And one thing you can do, the first 10 people who registered who are here tonight, we are checking. Mainvest actually has offered $50 credits on their site. So you'll actually be able to start investing without even using your money, using others. All right, so the first group is sort of on the macro level. Why isn't this popular knowledge yet? Are global businesses actively fighting the local economy movement?
Well, I think it's increasingly popular, and I'll just restate something I said in passing, which is that crowdfunding has grown, investment crowdfunding has grown dramatically during the pandemic. The best months have been the last 2 or 3 months. And this has happened even though the stock market, for reasons no human being can explain, has remained at a sky high level. Um, I think it just shows that this is really taking place. And I would say, fortunately, most mainstream investment institutions haven't taken this movement seriously. And I'm really appreciative of that, because if they did, they would try to put us out of business. But by the time they realize that this is serious, it will be too late.
So then one specific question about sort of the macro context, someone was asking more about the 5 Ps. Don't they feed into each other? How can they be leveraged to support the purse?
Yeah, so the full list of 6 Ps is really all about how you design a community investment strategy. And I have another book that I wrote called The Local Economy Solution, which gets deeper into what each of those Ps look like. And the point that these things are interrelated is absolutely right. And I'll give you one example that I think is really important right now. Um, Pre-purchasing. So purchasing is, one kind of act, but if you think about it, people who purchase a lot of stuff locally also are likely to be local investors. So I'll tell you one thing that I did at the beginning of the pandemic is my wife and I decided we were going to try to save one local business near us. So I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and one of our favorite businesses is Busboys and Poets, which, by the way, is coming to Baltimore very shortly. And Busboys and Poets is a combination restaurant, bar, bookstore, event center. And my wife and I decided, we spend in a typical year $1,000 eating at a Busboys and Poets. So we're going to write Andy Shalal $1,000 check and say, look, we know things are tough during this COVID period. Use this to hold on to some employees or whatever. And we're going to encourage anyone else we can think of to do this. Andy was so pleased, he gave us gift cards of $1,200. So we got a 20% rate of return on our investment. Now, it's not enough for me or a couple of people to do this with Andy Shalal. As a community, we should be creating websites listing businesses that are looking for pre-purchasing agreements like this. And here's the cool thing. Pre-purchasing in most instances is not a security. So it would be easy to set up a website like that. And there's a company based in Manitoba called Protegra that would be happy to work with any community that's on this call to help set up a pre-purchasing website. And guess what? The pre-purchasing activity will give you your short list of local investors to organize for the next round of building up your community.
Michael, there are a lot of specific questions around crowdfunding and rules. I'm just going to read sort of a bundle of them together. And then if you want me to review them after you answer a few, I can go through the ones you didn't answer again.
I'll take notes. Go ahead.
All right. So one is general. People want to learn more about the investment rules around crowdfunding. And there's been a question to just repeat the crowdfunding stats that you shared. And then in just terms of the rules, someone asked, why is there a limit in terms of the dollars that an unaccredited person can invest in a local business? Who is tracking that? There's also interest in understanding more between the accredited and unaccredited investor. And then someone asked a very good question, is there federal legislation being prepared to support or further opportunities to make it easier for non-accredited investors for crowdfunding, to make it easier for businesses? And that could actually feed well into the rules changes that are going into effect on March 15th, because that's one thing that we haven't talked about yet.
Good. Okay. All great stuff. So let me just repeat some of the rules again. The original rules, and I underscore original, these were the rules in 2016, was that any company could raise up to $1.07 million per year. Any investor, irrespective of income, could invest as much as $2,200 per year in those companies. And if you earn over $100,000, there are specific formulas that will allow you to invest higher amounts of money than $2,200. And they're complicated formulas, so I don't want to bother people with those details. The SEC in the first week of November changed the law around investment crowdfunding a little bit, and they now allow a company to raise up to $5 million. But because we have a change of administrations, the Biden administration froze all of the regulatory changes that the Trump administration put into effect in its final weeks. So we're not sure of exactly now when these rules will come into effect, but I'm pretty sure that at the end of the day, this rule will happen. Why are there limits on unaccredited investors putting money in? Well, this is the whole structure of securities law. And I mean, one way of thinking about it, and this gives legislators the benefit of the doubt, is to say, well, they were afraid of grandma buying swampland in Florida. And the idea is that in the early 1900s and then through the Depression, people who didn't have much in the way of means were putting huge amounts of money into stocks and securities that were fraudulent, and laws needed to be put into effect to protect them. One of the ways that we got the SEC and legislators to think about this differently was to say, well, look, my mother, 98 years old, I certainly don't want her to buy swampland in Florida. But my mother actually, what does she do with her money in her leisure time? She goes to one of a dozen casinos near her and spends it, on everything from playing slots and blackjack. Now, when my mother walks into a casino, do they say, excuse me, Mrs. Schuman, but are you an accredited gambler? And the answer is no. You're never asked that question. So you have two systems of risk management in this country. One called gambling, where an unaccredited gambler can lose everything and probably will over time, irrespective of their income. And another system called investing in local business and saving your community. And we have all these demands. So once the SEC became aware of this little inconsistency, they started to loosen up and think of, all right, maybe there's less demanding ways we can protect the small investor. And one of the ways they decided was to limit the amount of money that you could invest. So that's where the $2,200 comes in. What's the difference between accredited and unaccredited investors? So an accredited investor can achieve this status by doing one of three things. Either you individually earn $250,000 per year, or you and your spouse earn $300,000 per year, or you and your household have $1 million of wealth independent of the value of your house. So, when you look at those criteria, it probably, depending on how you calculate it, it's something between, 2 to 5% of the American public qualifies as an accredited investor. And by the way, the policing on people who want to say, well, I'm an accredited investor and you want to put more money in, you probably can get away with it, even if you're not accredited. It's very lightly policed. On the other hand, if you do that, you kind of give up your rights to sue or complain if you've been defrauded. So you don't want to be dishonest in this game. Is there federal legislation to change this? Well, if the new rules go into effect, there are rules. There are a bunch of legislators there who have Jobs Act 2, Jobs Act 3 that they're thinking about. It could happen. But I think just, the more important rule changes are things we haven't talked about. Things like on local investment funds, or creating local stock exchanges, or changing the rules around self-directed IRAs. Those kinds of things are not being discussed right now, but hopefully soon will be. Stephanie?
All right, so there's been a lot of talk in the chat about community investment trusts. So someone just wants to learn more about them. And someone was asking if Mercy Corps in East Portland is an example. And I just want to throw in one great example is actually in Baltimore. Community Wealth Builders has been working with the York Road Partnership for now over 2 years to create a capital source that community residents can pull their money into, so the community can buy and then maintain control over commercial property in the blighted area. So if you're interested in this, Baltimore is actually one of the places leading the way too. And I can tell you more about that outside of this conversation on crowdfunding.
Great. And yeah, so a community investment trust is basically a form of local investing in real estate. And there's a lot of models out there. There are co-ops that are real estate co-ops that people are investing in, and there are companies that are facilitating the investment in affordable housing projects. If you want a place where you can see some of these cool things being offered in a crowdfunding framework, go to a website called Small Change. They've got a bunch of creative real estate projects on there. But I think the Community Investment Trust, which Mercy Corps has done, is a really nice example of this. Basically, they made it possible for people living in a low-income community to buy shares of a local shopping center. And the idea that all of us could buy our local commercial districts, over time, that's a very exciting concept. Um, so they've done it successfully in Portland, and I spoke to the executive director of Mercy Corps, which, by the way, is a $500 million social mission enterprise in the Pacific Northwest. But I spoke to him about 2 weeks ago, and he said that they've got projects now in 18 communities across the United States. So I think there's going to be a lot of creativity about what are the structures for people to invest in these things, whether they're trusts, co-ops, nonprofits, for-profits. So the jury is out which is best, but it's great that there's this experimentation.
And then someone asked about Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is just the name of the nonprofit. That's in East Portland that is spearheading. It's called the Community Investment Trust. And again, our project in Baltimore, actually, it has replicated their model. So you can see it in action here. And Michael Hindle asked, can CITs invest in businesses, not just properties? They typically have been used for properties, but the community pools its money and collectively agrees how to, what to invest in. So they, in Baltimore, we're actually going to be investing in the properties and also perhaps in some businesses to get them up and running. So Mike, I'm going to give you one more group of questions. And then I see Lashana has joined, so I will introduce her. And I'm grouping together, trying to bundle a lot in, sort of about the social side. So a few people have said, is there space in crowdfunding for investors who have more of an interest in community benefits rather than economic returns? A few have said, I'm interested in social benefits. And then someone asked, what does community ROI look like for social entrepreneurship? Is crowdfunding considered a facet of social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so you're going to find in the space a lot of examples of enterprises that you might invest in that do have larger community returns than private returns. Although sometimes it's hard to discern that, because I think most entrepreneurs who are raising money, trying to raise capital, will say, we're really doing both. And they're going to try to have it both ways. And your job as an evaluator is to really suss out whether this thing is just going to be a social return or will have a chance at a reasonable private return on top of that. And that's why it's homework to really investigate on a case-by-case basis. And remember that, it's when a business fails, it may not be because the business idea is bad. It may be because it was badly executed, or it had inadequate capital, or there was some surprising event like COVID that threw it off the rails. So we can, as the old expression goes, man plans and God laughs. And you can try to ascertain as much information as possible, but all investment is risky. All social investment is risky. So you can come up with a third decimal place rate of return, private rate of return, social rate of return, predicting the future. Treat that number extremely skeptically.
All right, so I'm going to come on screen for a second. And I want to encourage people, though, to still write questions in the chat. I want to introduce Lashana and talk to you about one of the businesses that we're working with. And then if there is time afterwards, we can just keep going through more questions, because we do have until 8. And one of the questions actually, I think, leads into my introduction. So someone asked, are crowdfunding portals destination specific? And I took that to mean, do they have a geography, a location? And that is what makes the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange so unique. We believe we are the only locally focused crowdfunding platform in the nation, which means we are trying to excite people about investment crowdfunding in Baltimore. the federally licensed portals all have specific flavors and flares. Some focus on IT businesses, some focus on businesses in the food industry. We are, our hypothesis is that people in Baltimore love local business because they make up the fabric of our communities. It doesn't necessarily matter what field it's in. We want our local businesses to thrive. So that is sort of the essence of the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. We have been now operating for a little bit over a year. Our goal is to educate businesses that investment crowdfunding is real. You can do this, and to help them figure out how to do it successfully. To date, we've worked with about 36 locally owned businesses. They all have had successful campaigns, and collectively, they've raised over $2 million from close to 5,000 different investors. So I think we're proving that it really can work on the local level. So we work to educate businesses, then we work to really educate people, unaccredited investors. You can invest in local business, and that's been sort of the highlight of this evening, having Michael walk us through all of this. And then the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange is aimed to be a tool. So businesses that are interested in raising capital and people that are interested in investing locally can easily meet and find one another. And one of the great businesses that just went live on the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange is an amazing business that is very, very, very close to Market Center. It's like in the broader swath of area. Lashana Jones and her mother have an amazing locally owned business. It is so unique. They make gourmet hot dogs all from scratch, topped from ingredients that they make from scratch. I'll let her tell you. But what is especially exciting is that they are looking for capital now to move into the old Women's Industrial Exchange building, which is sort of historic hallmark building in Baltimore. And we are really, really thrilled to be able to support their campaign because it's a great business and really one that I think will make our community more vibrant, healthy. And so let me turn it over to you, Lashana. You can talk for a few minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie. Can everybody hear me? Because I'm sitting in front of this fridge and, it's pretty loud. I'm around some heavy duty equipment right now because I'm in the kitchen. But thank you so much for having me today. Again, I'm Lashana. I'm actually the mom. And my daughter is Dejan. She's my partner. And so, yes, we started Sporty Dog Creations back in 2017, and we tested our product in local farmers market. And we started right at the Greenmount West Farmers Market, which was an Open Works parking lot. It was their first year. And I talked with my daughter and I said, hey, let's make hot dogs healthy. People who don't eat hot dogs don't like to eat them because they're not healthy. And so we wanted to make them from scratch. We started with a vegan and a beef dog. We now have a jerk chicken hot dog. And we top them with fresh foods from grilled strawberries to grilled pineapples. We also have sporty selections that we coin after some of our hometown teams, such as the Baltimore Ravens. We also have a Baltimore Black Sox dog, which is topped with a black-eyed pea chili that we make in-house, and caramelized onions. So we get really, creative and bold with our toppings. And so we started right here. We want to grow right here. I'm from Baltimore. I'm a hometown girl. I love everything about Baltimore. And so we're excited to move in the Women's Exchange building and increase our capacity and production there. Our model fits the scope of the mission there at Women's Exchange, and we just think it's a perfect fit. And so we're going to have the first gourmet hot dog outdoor patio in downtown Baltimore. So we're excited about that.
There's a question in the chat about your actual moving date.
We're already in the Women's Exchange. So we started producing last year out of their co-op kitchen upstairs. While we were here, Jack and Zach's, who was downstairs, actually closed. So we're in negotiations now to take the downstairs space. So we are looking to have that space after we iron out all of the kinks, probably later this year. Any more questions? Let me open the chat just in case.
I don't see any directed to you, and I was gonna. Her business is Sporty Dog Creations, and if you go to the Maryland Exchange, I popped the link directly in the chat so everyone can find it. Sporty Dog Creations is the first business listed, and you can read a little blurb about it. And then if you click on the link, you'll go to her campaign page, and that is the place that by law, you need to list sort of everything you're doing and show your forms, and it's one stop for you to learn every detail about how you can invest in the amazing local business. So I'm going to turn it. Someone was asked for how many employees and how much you're trying to raise. So one tricky thing about investment crowdfunding is we really legally aren't allowed to give the specifics of the raise. It's meant to be public, and all information is supposed to be public, which is why it's all on a publicly accessible website. So we can share that she is looking to raise $50,000, and ideally, as they build capacity to hire locally and have a great local workforce of people. But I would and if you have specific questions about the raise, there is a space on her campaign page that is completely public where you can list your questions and she will answer them, where everyone can access the answer. So that's sort of one nuance of grassroots investment crowdfunding. We need to be careful about the specifics when we talk about this in public, because we want to be sure that everyone gets the same information, including people that aren't here tonight. So Kristen, back to you if you want to do the fun little raffle for everyone.
Yeah, we have a giveaway. Yay.
Yes. Thank you. We really appreciate your joining us tonight to get everybody excited about a very specific local business. That's awesome. We're looking forward to you opening on Charles Street. And thank you so much, because you have contributed 2 gift cards to Sporty Dog for a raffle for the people who are on the call right now. And I was trying to figure out the best way to do this. And the best thing I could come up with is I have a list of everybody who is still on the call right now. And there's a number next to their name on my Excel spreadsheet. So I was just going to ask you to pick 2 numbers between 2 and 27. And whoever is on that in my Excel spreadsheet next to those 2 numbers are going to get those awesome gift cards. So up to you, Lashana, 2 numbers.
2 numbers. Okay, so let me start with 15, which is my birthday, 15.
Okay, excellent. And the number?
Let's do 21 for 2021.
All right. Okay. So number 15 is Meg. Oh, Meg Boucher. You still there, Meg? Are you still on the call? Oh, all right. Maybe not.
Guess someone else will get lucky.
Yes. Okay. I should have made a plan. I'm going to go to the one right below Meg, and that is Micah Hunter. I know Micah's still on the call. Micah, you are the lucky recipient, because you would be number 15.
All right.
And then number 21, Scott Cashnow. Are you still on the call? I tried to keep up with everybody's coming and going.
I don't see him anymore.
Okay, so I'm going to go right beneath Scott. And that is T. McDonald.
Hello.
Okay, excellent. You are our
Yay.
second singer.
Thank you.
T. McDonald and Micah. All right, we will get those to you. I know how to reach Michael. I'm not sure I know how to reach you, Ms. McDonald. So if you could put in, make sure I have your, oh, I have your email address. I'll be in touch with you.
And then Lashana, don't drop off yet. So we have 2 more questions I see for you in the chat. One, someone wants to know if you make a hot link, and then someone else wants to know, do you also sell your hot dogs as a product? So someone is part of a local co-op in Catonsville, and would you sell to a business?
Yes, absolutely. We're definitely looking to expand by connecting with other businesses and being able to sell wholesale. So we are definitely doing that. Please reach out to us. We're looking forward to engaging with other local businesses. And then as far as a hot link, we are not on the hot link yet, but that is something that we did think about exploring. So that may be something we'll decide to do down the road for sure.
Well, thank you so much for making time for this tonight. And to me, like, your business gets to the essence of the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. I feel so honored to work with great local businesses that are really coming onto scene to make our city more vibrant and stronger. And I am really, really excited to support your raise. And when when life becomes a little safer, to spend more time downtown in Market Center and at your cafe or business. So we can let you pop off because I know you are in your kitchen and have a lot to do. But I encourage everyone again to go to the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange, check out her business, its campaign, and all the other great businesses that are listed there.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing you all, and grab a hot dog. Come on down.
Well, thank you.
And I would encourage everyone, like, if you know of other great local businesses that could benefit from being featured on the exchange, just send them to us. Like, our goal is to, our work is actually, for free. We work with businesses, we help feature their campaigns so they will succeed. We are a nonprofit initiative. So our goal is really to promote this across Maryland, so great local businesses can thrive, so individuals can build wealth, and really this is, for community wealth builders, a way to build and grow community wealth. So Michael, I've been looking through the chat. There are a few very specific questions about and you might have answered some of them, actually. I'm going through, it looks like you've answered some directly in the chat, which is great. There's been one question too about our next event on April 20th. And our initial goal was for that to be similar to this, to be really introductory, but we do have some grant funding to do up to 4 different workshops in Market Center. And our goal is to make them really relevant for the stakeholders in Market Center. So if there are enough people that are interested in a deeper dive or a more, something more specific, please reach out and let us know, so we'll be able to create a workshop that really fits community interest and community needs.
And I'll add to that if any of you feel inspired to maybe serve as an anchor for a group of people, and this may be a group you don't even know who the members would be yet, but it's just something you'd be interested in doing, please let us know that, because that will give us some idea of how to start organizing folks to make this all manageable.
So Michael, are you comfortable in like the last 15-20 minutes? If people have not had their questions answered, I feel like our group is getting smaller for people.
Yeah, just unmute and go ahead. Yep.
So I want to be sure that we've addressed everyone's questions, and
Great.
I tried to keep up with the chat, but the questions kept coming.
And remember, most of you will need to unmute.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Yes, hi, this
So,
is Michael Simpson calling, talking from Compton, California. Have you seen any, I'm merely interested in part of my day job is the circular economy. Do you see any movement in that space for community investment? And this is where you repurpose goods, not turn them down to recycle, but to actually repurpose them and put them back in the circular economy. So that's what I'm interested in. Is there any community development funds or models around that space that I might be able to use to launch myself?
um, it's so, this is not an expertise of mine per se, although at the MBA that I teach for at Bard College focuses on green related activities, and most of the students are actually actively involved in circular economy related projects, and they see local investing as just, you know, the investment version of the same thing. um, it's you know, not a good circular economy piece allows no leakage of good materials, and a good local investment ecosystem allows no leakage of investment dollars. Um, but specific examples, I would just invite you to email me, and my email again is Schuman@IGC, and I will give this to some of my students and have them respond to you directly.
Thank you.
Nice.
Hey, how you doing, Michael? My name is Micah Hunter. Actually, also here from New York City, but you know, we have fallen in love with Baltimore, and we're going to be doing a project there downtown Baltimore. You know, we it's going to be a 15 unit loft live workspace, and we're going to have 2 ground floor retail spaces that are going to be for local minority, women, Black-owned businesses in the area. My question is, most of our background is in traditional sources of financing, but I guess we were invited to this event tonight by great Kristen. She's been awesome. I'm getting to know her, but we're looking. We don't know. We haven't really explored the crowdfunding thing, but we were just interested. What would you say is a good start for someone like development firm like us that wants to kind of partner, I guess, with investors, local investors, or so to obviously because again, these retail spaces are going to have significant rent-free period. We think it should be helpful for the local businesses in the area, given the ravages of the pandemic in retail overall. But so what do you think is a good start, for someone like us?
Yeah, so I'm going to give some thoughts, and I'm betting that both Kristen and Stephanie have some thoughts on this as well. So I am working right now with a banker in Albemarle, North Carolina, and he is they have a project there to convert an old hotel into a mixed-use building with both co-op units and then retail on the ground space. And we kind of walked through the decision, and they realized, you know what, we have got almost all the money in hand with traditional sources, but you know what, we're going to actually raise a few $100,000 of this project with local people, because that actually will help us politically in terms of any zoning and other issues that arise with the local authorities. It will help us in terms of people being interested and engaged with the businesses on our ground floor. And I think it's also just a testament to that this building, this project, is a commitment to the local economy. So I think it may, even if you have all of your money from traditional sources, figuring out a way to bring in some piece for the grassroots investors can be useful for you. And one other possibility as well is have some of your traditional investors hold their stake for a short period of time, like for a year. And that year then gives you a chance to sell off that interest into the community. So there's a lot of different ways you could organize that.
Yeah, so I want to share, I mean, we started the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange focused on business. That was sort of, you know, the goal to help local businesses access investment capital. And over the first few months, even, we had so many calls, do you do real estate? Do you do real estate? So we just began getting our sort of toes wet in that over the past few months. And, you know, I would welcome the opportunity to talk to you, you know, in a meeting and hear more about your project and talk to you about what's possible. But our most recent partner that we brought onto the project is Small Change, and they focus on the real estate piece. And if you go to the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange, actually the one real estate project we're focused or featuring now is a project that really had raised the bulk of its capital, and through sort of the mission lens, they wanted to ensure that the community would benefit from the project and its growth. So it's, I think investment crowdfunding is a really interesting tool and a really promising one for real estate, and one that's gonna, I think, grow over the coming years, especially since the SEC now has raised the limit to 3.5 million. I think more people are gonna use it as a tool to get more serious capital.
Thank you very much, Stephanie and Michael. And yes, Stephanie, definitely I would love to talk a little bit more about that. Yep, thank you guys.
Great, thanks for coming.
I have a question. I don't live in Market Center, but I live just outside of Market Center. So our constituency definitely looks very similar. Between your books and the other resources that you have, and maybe anything else that you've come across, what do you recommend be the layman's pipeline for getting people, you know, invested, no pun intended, in this, understanding the language, you know, coming to understand the importance of local investment and the importance of money management in general, because of course, Baltimore has a very disenfranchised population, especially economically, and that is what downtown looks like.
Yeah, so one of the things, so Stephanie mentioned quickly at the top that our work is funded in part by the T. Rowe Price Foundation and the Able Foundation. And part of our commitment to them is to build out the resources on our website that can provide some of that information. Now, I mean, and honestly, I have the disadvantage of being educated as an economist and a lawyer. So I'm a little out of the real world. So anything that I write may or may not suit the works, may not be, you know, worded probably. So it's going to be an iterative process to make it real. The other thing that we want to do on our site, and we're still, you know, thinking about how this is going to look, but really, you know, have some webinars with businesses and people involved in the security side of thing, and really demystify this area, because like other areas of the law, it's not all that complicated, but it's been made very complicated. Right. And so we'll try to do that. But I will say that I try to write my books for the layperson, and I try to make them fun and very much storytelling. So, you know, give them a whirl and see if they work, and if they don't, we'll try something else.
Radical. And actually kind of shooting off that, you've definitely touched on the point of voting with your wallet throughout this talk. And Baltimore City has like a really, really low voter turnout. And so I hope that you can give a sort of high level connection for verbiage, elevator pitch for community organizers, people that are doing groundwork level, to help sort of sell, again, no pun intended, the point or the advantage of doing both and the connection between one and the other.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's maybe not the best sign of a society that how it spends its money is often, where their energy is, but it is the reality. And I think if we can get people to be more mindful about their purchasing dollar and their investment dollar and how they build or don't build wealth in their community, that really can make a huge difference. So yeah, that kind, at root, I think myself, Stephanie, and Kristen, we are all organizers.
I do want to add, for people in other communities, our goal is to do really in-depth work in communities across Maryland. So reach out, we can figure out how to do deep dives into other neighborhoods. I mean, our goal really is to try to be working with businesses and excite the residents that live around them, or the stakeholders that, are close to them, to do this at micro levels. So, the more communities that are really engaged, the better. Someone asked again about the April event. We're going to be sending out a survey to get people's feedback on tonight, how it went. So the next event will really aim to pull feedback in, but it will be similar to this. But we will be planning, again, future workshops, and we have some grant money to do up to 4 in this neighborhood. So again, if there's a passion and interest, some area that a lot of people are really interested in digging deeper into, let us know, because we can create the content. Our goal is to figure out what people here want and to create workshops that are dynamic, engaging, and meet Market Center's needs.
Stephanie, I'm not in Market Center either. I'm down in Southwest Baltimore. And do you guys work with the Southwest Partnership? That's kind of how I came to know about this event.
Yeah. So we had grant funding for Market Center, and the second community that we have some grant funding to work in is Southwest Baltimore. So we are slowly getting our toe wet, but our goal is to do similar workshops with that area in mind, and to really work to get businesses located sort of in the Southwest Partnership geography on our website as we do the workshops, to create those connections. Okay, and just remind everyone, we work across Maryland. So if you know businesses anywhere, or if you're a person anywhere, bring them to us.
Okay. And to that end, there's a specific business that I have in mind. It's I guess, local breweries are sadly seem like a fad that's already almost fading rather than growing. But, my favorite brewer, favorite beer ever, just got kicked out of his contract brewer. And sadly, he has never had his own brewery. So he's always been contract brewing with Heavy Seas, with Duclaw, with other places. And Steve Demchek is his name. It's Raven Beer. It's the Poe themed beers. If you've seen these in the marketplace, I mean, that belongs in Southwest Baltimore, right? The Poe house is here. Poe's grave isn't far away. I mean, Steve needs to be here, right? We need him here producing beer.
So, it's like, he loves him, right? Like, this is going to work. Like, it's like, this is a way to get the capital you need from the people that love you, and to really enable your customers and community to benefit from your growth and success. So it's like a double win. Feel free to have them reach out to me directly. You can make a virtual intro. And I have to say, one of our partners, Mainbest, which is the one that has awarded us the credits tonight, I think the #1 business on their site by far are breweries and pubs. And they do incredibly well because they have a solid base of supporters, especially in COVID, right? Who doesn't especially love beer and wine this day and age?
Okay, thank you.
So I think we're sort of at the end of the line, but Kristen, is there any last thoughts you want to share about next steps for Market Center? Whoops, your sound's going in and out a little bit.
Okay, is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I'm going to continue to do outreach to all of the businesses in and near Market Center, as well as businesses that we are hoping will locate in Market Center. As you all know, the Lexington Market Project is underway, and they are recruiting food-related businesses to Lexington Market. But we also have a number of other landlords who are looking for small, creative, minority and women-owned businesses, and we are trying to roll out the welcome mat as much as we possibly can. So if you know of other businesses that are interested in moving to Market Center, regardless of whether or not they are interested in crowdfunding, please send them my way. I would be delighted to work with them. If you are interested in participating in crowdfunding from an investor standpoint, feel free to reach back out to me. I'm going to try to connect as many people as possible who are interested. We want to get some of those lions started here that Michael was talking about out in Port Townsend, Washington. So I will say I'm having some email difficulties. If you try to reach me in the next couple of days via my work email, you might not get through to me. So I put my personal email in the chat box. Feel free to reach out to me that way in the meantime. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Michael. This was a treat to hear from you. We're looking forward to April 20th. And thank you, Stephanie. You're sort of the glue that holds us all together on this. So we really appreciate it. And have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you all. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. Like, we are passionate about this project's success in Baltimore and in Maryland. So we're here to support.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.